If you like taking photos with your Xperia phone using the basic mode, I want to show you how easy it is to go from this to this using Photography Pro on your Xperia. And I want you to feel inspired to try for yourself and unlock all the creative possibilities with Photography Pro.
So first of all, what is Photography Pro? So as some of you might already know, Sony has their professional alpha mirrorless camera system that's used by photographers around the world, including myself. So Photography Pro on the Xperia is imitating that same user interface onto the Xperia phones, meaning you can get professional tools on your Xperia to capture those wow photos. And for beginners, looking at this might look a bit overwhelming. So in this video, I want to show you how easy it actually is to use Photography Pro and how you can use it to get professional results without any experience of manual controls. So first, we need to have a quick overlook over what Photography Pro looks like. And after that, look at the different modes and what they do and how you can use them to achieve a certain look to your photos. So by pressing right here, you can change between the different lenses on the Xperia 1 Mark IV. Here you have the 16mm ultra wide and the 24mm wide, as well as the 85 to 125mm true optical zoom lens. So by scrolling the wheel right here, you can optically zoom between 85 and 125mm, which means you have no loss of image quality like you normally would on smartphones with digital zoom. So if we look above, we have a button that says DISP, it stands for display, and if you press that, you get some tools and information that will help you to compose an image, such as file format and storage left, horizontal leveling, and down in the right corner, the histogram. The histogram is a tool to check the shadows, midtones, and highlights in your photo. But to keep things simple, we're gonna leave the histogram for another time. And on the right side of the screen, we see 12 different buttons, and we're gonna go through some of them. So by pressing here, you can choose between the different drive modes. So we have single shooting and continuous shooting low, and continuous shooting high, as well as a 3 or 10 second self timer. And when you're shooting actions such as wildlife, pets, sports, using the continuous shooting high is great because then you can simply long press on the shutter button. It takes 20 photos a second, which is insanely fast. This is good because then you can choose the best photo out of those, 100 shots you took. And on this button, you can change the focus mode. AFS is for still subjects, AFC is for moving subjects, and MF is manual focus. I personally use AFC most of the times. So you might have heard about the term called ISO in photography. I'm going to explain this in a very simplified way. So by raising the ISO value, you brighten up the photo. And that's because you amplify the camera sensor's sensitivity to light. But all you need to remember is to keep the ISO as low as you can, depending on how much light you have in your scene. So the higher the ISO, the more noise gets introduced into your image, and that affects image quality. So try keeping the ISO as low as you can at all times. Now, let's check out the different modes inside of Photography Pro. So let's say you're in basic mode. You click up here to change modes. Here you have some different ones you can choose from. Auto is, you guessed it, all automatic. So the camera decides all of the settings for you. You just have to point and shoot, basically. Similar to basic mode. But first I want to mention M, which is manual exposure. So this lets you set all of these settings by yourself. And I personally think it is very good to learn all of the different settings and what they do. But as a beginner, the following P or S modes is a very great way to start elaborating with manual controls. So that's what I'm focusing on in this demonstrational video. So the P is Program Auto, which controls shutter speed for you, with all of the other settings being left up to you. So in sake of this tutorial, we're going to focus on the exposure compensation values in this mode. So the exposure of a photo is, in very basic term, how bright or dark the photo is. And you read and set the values with this exposure compensation. And the 0 value in the center is what the camera thinks is the correct exposure. So by placing the arrow to the left of the center, the minus value, you expose for a darker image. And if you set the arrow to the right of the 0, you expose for a brighter image. So should we always set it to 0 to have a correct and the best exposure then? And no. What the camera thinks is the right exposure is just for guidance. You are the photographer and you decide how bright or dark you want the photo to be. So in the P mode, the camera will adjust the exposure accordingly to the value you set, with simply changing the shutter speed for you. And depending on the scene, the shutter speed might be too slow or too fast for what you're trying to photograph.
So here's an example how I set up the camera using Program Auto to go from this to this. First, we're gonna dial down the ISO as low as we can, and then set a 10-second self-timer for me to be able to get into the shot before the camera takes the photo. And then we're changing the white balance to fluorescent to get a cold and blue look. Adjust the exposure value to the left to make the lights on the car stand out, and we got our shot.
So if we're scrolling to S, we have shutter speed priority. This mode lets you decide the shutter speed and controls all the other settings for you, such as the ISO, for example. And you set the exposure value you want, just as in Program Auto, using this button here. And the shutter speed is, in my opinion, the most important setting to have control over. Fast shutter speeds are great for capturing fast-moving subjects because it freezes objects in motion. And the slow shutter speed allows you to capture motion blur. I guess you've seen photos like this. They are taken with a very slow shutter speed, and everything that moves while the shutter is open gets blurry. In this case, the water. This can be used in many creative ways. However, a fast shutter speed needs a well-lit scene. Otherwise, the camera wants to raise the ISO and introduce noise into your image. And as I said earlier, keeping the ISO as low as you can is good to remain the best image quality possible.
Here's an example how I set up the camera using shutter speed priority to go from this to this. First, we need to let the camera know that we want a darker photo by adjusting the exposure value. Then adjust the shutter speed down to something like 1/40 or 30, and make sure we're in continuous shooting high to get as many photos as possible. And lastly, change the white balance to something that looks good. And now, try to pan the camera to the exact speed of the car. And we just got our shot.
So I hope this video inspired you to try out Photography Pro for yourself, and I'd really like to see what you come up with your Xperia phone, so make sure to use the hashtag #WowXperia when you're posting your photos. So until next time, have a good one, and I will see you. Bye.